Welcome to the Stockout. This is your show for all things related to the CPG and retail industries and their supply chains at FreightWaves. I am one of your hosts, Mike Baudendistel, joined by Grace, Barbara Walters of Freight, Sharkey. I'll call you Barbara Walters of Freight because you've been conducting some interviews here that I want to ask you about. Saw that you interviewed Ryan Peterson, CEO of Flexport, and went straight to the top of my YouTube feed. It was right up about it on the site. What can you tell us about that?
First of all, I will say, as always, a fun interview. There's a number of personalities in this industry that are always a really great time just to speak with one-on-one in particular. So I was really excited to do this interview, and even more so, it came out last week that they had released about 20 different AI updates to their technology. And really interesting enough, kind of watching a little bit of the rhetoric on LinkedIn, social media, Twitter, etc., was a little bit of pushback of what that meant and what those tools were. So I will say, for everyone out there watching, there were over 20 different updates. I got a full list and got to see all of them. So that number is 100% accurate, and there's a lot more to come. Of course, if you check out the interview, a big thing that happened is he was speaking with Airbnb CEO, and Ryan, of course, got motivated by that and is starting to set these 6-month goals and timelines for his team to produce, of course, some wonderful updates to their system using technology that we're all using today. And I think, even outside of what Flexport is doing, he made a really great point in the headline of the article that every single member of their team and every single member of your team, no matter what the industry is or what your job is as a part of supply chain, should be trying to leverage AI in some type of way. And honestly, I completely agree. If you're not, consider yourself dead at this point, right? We're using it within our phones, we're using it in our everyday lives, even where we might not consider it or think about it. And you bring up the YouTube feed, right? There is, of course, using your data to bring up what you'll likely want to watch at the top of your feed. So why aren't we using that in our everyday lives and our everyday work? So I love that he did challenge the industry on that. Another big thing, too, I want to touch on as well that I thought was very interesting and hoping to do some more of these interviews with Ryan and the Flexport team as well in the future is, just like we're seeing here at FreightWaves, I know the Sonar team has experienced this too. Shippers out there, and I'm sure those watching this show as well, are kind of lost and confused, right? As interesting as this time is when we look at our local news or CNN or MSNBC or Fox News, the rest of our big brands out there and a lot of the companies we cover on this show don't know what their next move is. So they're really trying to judge their inventory appropriately, make sure there's warehouses across the globe in the places that they need it. And I think the one thing too, and I recently did a webinar on this as well, that came up, is the China Plus One policies, right? I think a lot of companies have been focusing over the last decade on strategizing their supply chain to be a little less reliant on China. But the issue that does come with that as well, and it lightly came up in this interview too, I don't know if we touched on it so much in the article, but definitely within the actual interview, which you can see in the article, is that there's a good chance that some of those plus one countries will have tariffs on them too. Or we've talked about as well that a lot of the manufacturing, if those parts and pieces end up being found being manufactured in China, but then being produced and put together in a different country, there is a chance that tariffs can be hit on those as well. So again, it's, I think the state of confusion and on what exactly and how exactly brands should be operating their brands across the globe. But everyone is just kind of in this loss, and it's tough when, the administration makes these changes, sometimes even overnight, of policies that they feel very firm and have a firm stance on. When those change overnight, right, it's very difficult for our supply chain planners out there. So we got to touch on a lot of different things as well, including, Ryan and Flexport's views on a lot of these issues and how they're trying to educate, especially their customers, to get through these times and just make their supply chains more agile.
Yeah, and in addition to having Ryan Peterson on, there was also an interview at the 3PL Summit with Bill Driegert, and that one was, I think, a little bit more focused on what's happening right now, what's happening in the past few weeks. I believe Thomas Wasson was the interviewer in that case. And, Bill brings up a few kind of interesting things. He said he did see an immediate uplift in the goods that were being moved into the U.S. after Mexico made the tax adjustment where shippers couldn't use Mexico as a way to circumvent the 321, import situation. So that was interesting. And they said they definitely have seen inventory get pulled forward. They said sort of the seasonality has been thrown out of balance. They said it's sort of been thrown out of balance for some time. And January has not been sort of the soft month that it has been historically. Now, some of that might be just a lot of shopping in January also with people who received gift cards. But they said it was sort of a better month than it has been historically. I guess from our Sonar data, it's kind of looked like February was just as weak as it typically was. And then Bill Driegert says he thinks we're going to see about 2 to 5% freight inflation this year. Might see a step down after the produce season. I think we're already probably seeing that before it reaccelerates a little bit later, in the year. So the shippers kind of think about that 2 to 5% as sort of a reasonable, case. I would think.
Yeah. Again, it's interesting having these two leaders coming from, in a way, the same company, right? And seeing how the inefficiencies, not across the globe, but also here domestically, are creating some very interesting and strategic supply chains in particular, and looking for transportation partners on top of that, I think is big too. So I love that it brings up a little bit of what could happen right with the produce season as well. I think it's funny. Every year we have these seasons that we're used to. So I hear produce season, I'm like, here we go. It's that time is right around the corner. But hopefully we see some more there. I think Thomas and I have even talked on the radio before. Will we see issues? I think on this show we talked about it as well with immigration when it does come to produce season. I think that's, again, too early to tell at this point. I'm thinking not so much, at least this first year. But of course, we'll see what's coming up. And it sounds like they're working on a lot too. We should be hearing from them soon on some of, I think, their domestic products as well as their more global freight forwarding products too.
It'll be very interesting. Also, Bill Driegert hinted that Flexport has a big product announcement coming up. So we'll see what that is. But I want to move on to the next story here, which is Walmart acquired a shopping mall. Really, the question is why did they do that? What does it say about their strategy? So sort of what we know is that Walmart bought the Monroeville Mall. This is a shopping center near Pittsburgh with about 100 operating businesses within that mall, spans about 200 acres. They acquired this for $34 million. In the context of Walmart's size, not a big deal for them. The site's not near any Walmarts. The closest is 4 miles away, and the mall, sort of getting into some factoids here, the mall was a prime location for the 1978 horror film Dawn of the Dead. It also has a Living Dead museum and gift shop. If you're ever in Monroeville, that sounds like the thing to do. It was also the setting for a scene in the 1983 movie Flashdance. Haven't seen any of those movies myself, but getting back to Walmart, not sure why they acquired it. I don't think it's because they're movie buffs. But in 2018, Walmart announced plans to develop malls around stores they called town centers. So maybe consistent with that plan, even though that was several years ago. So they wanted to provide pedestrian connectivity from the box stores to experience zones. So Walmart's working with Texas-based Cypress Equities to lead these redevelopment process of this mall, which includes the mall and also this additional set of stores, which seems like it's adjacent to the mall. And then there's some speculation they could turn this into a mixed-use space, maybe with the Walmart Supercenter and a fulfillment center hub, in addition to these other amenities. And Walmart says it's very interested in being part of any future redevelopment of that particular site. So Walmart wants to be involved. And there's been some speculation that Walmart doesn't have interest in the mall itself. It's just more of a real estate deal. It's maybe easier to do that because it's already zoned for this commercial use, easier than taking a brownfield site from scratch. It's already in a highly populated area. Utilities and transportation are already in place. But Grace, what do you make of this? So why would they want to acquire a shopping mall? Aren't shopping malls kind of dying?
Well, this could be a special edition of Who Asked For This, and that would be the Gen Zers. I mean, they want to get out. Did you know, Mike, the new cool thing is to like get out of your house and do things? Like, who would have. Who would have fathomed such an event? And I think this might be kind of an aim towards this. And you're right, a backup plan. They own the real estate. They can, of course, turn it into micro fulfillment centers as well. I think that actual possession of that real estate in particular could be advantageous to them outside of these town centers that they are planning. And there's quite a few across the country, some in Colorado that they're working on. I think what their plan is to kind of reinvent the Walmart experience. From what I've been reading about the town centers in particular, I think what they're aiming for is a little bit more of like this destination experience. I don't know if you guys have. Well, you do actually, because we did a FreightWaves event in Chattanooga. Not sure what you have in Dallas, but we have a number of kind of these like I called Horrocks here, like these farmers markets type of experiences in particular, where the produce is kind of all in an area, different foods are in a different spot. I think they're trying to make that a little bit more of like this mini mall experience when you go into a Walmart, and being able to kind of buy this real estate and have like a nice place to eat outside, take advantage of, a little bit more green space, I think is the key here, right? Making this more of a destination than someplace that you're just coming and going very quickly. I think I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, honestly, Costco, I think it could lightly turn this, could do the same thing with their situation. But for this one, I think we're going to see a little bit more of like inside outside layout, representing something a little bit more hometowny of a feel. But there is supposed to be a lot of technology that's also going into these stores as well. Initially, when they announced these, there was a number of sustainability plans with it, let alone energy efficient, but charging stations too for customers to charge up their vehicles while they're walking around this Walmart experience. So we'll see if it comes to fruition. There's supposed to be gyms in these, apparently, freestanding restaurants. They've talked about bringing more different restaurants outside of like Subway is what I've seen so far, like Shake Shack, Caribou Coffee, etc. So skateboarding parks might be a part of it too. So we'll see. Maybe 10 years down the line, the place to go on a Friday night will be Walmart once again. That's something that we did here in high school back in the day, but this might be a little bit more fun of an experience in particular. So shout out to all the Gen Zs out there pushing for Walmart to think outside of the square box that you can usually find them in. And again, a worst case scenario, you have the real estate, you could turn it into warehousing or fulfillment centers and take advantage of it that way too.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if what they end up doing with it, and whether they roll this out to a nationwide sort of plan. I wonder if it's not a way for them to go a little upscale. Walmart's not a place you have to go to; it's a place you want to go to. But we'll see. I want to move on to the next story, which this really goes directly to what a lot of things we talk about in the Stockout, retail, fulfillment, et cetera. And yes, the question: does air cargo market just completely depend on the de minimis at this point? And there was a really good article last week written by Eric Kulish. He follows the air cargo space very closely, and he asks, has the e-commerce bubble burst for air cargo? And looking at the rates and Sonar, it kind of feels like it has. I mean, if you can bring up the Sonar chart on air cargo, and what it essentially shows was, since the pandemic hit, the air cargo rates, here we're looking specifically from Hong Kong to LAX, were elevated at sort of all times of the year. Sort of before the pandemic, they would spike towards the end of the year. Since the pandemic, they've been elevated throughout, with particular spikes at the end of 2023 and 2024. But now we're at roughly the lowest level since the pandemic hit in early 2020. And it just makes you think, well, this is it's just being impacted by some of this e-commerce, potentially going away. Analysts have certainly become more bearish on the air cargo market. In January, global volumes grew 2% year over year. That's lower than was expected. And it's driven primarily due to lower volumes out of China. As the Chinese New Year approached, there was a little bit of differing timing on when the Chinese New Year happened this year. But then when you look at what International Air Cargo Transport Association is saying on supply and demand, they say demand was up 3.2% in January, but capacity was up 6.8%. Yields were up year over year, but down from December. Maybe that's expected. You'd expect them to be down from December. And then in February, global demand remained even with last year. So not a lot of growth, but not really falling off either. And then some interesting stats on this Amsterdam Schiphol airport. So that's the main airport for passengers there. So the number of all cargo flights 5% lower in January year over year, and total air cargo tonnage declined 12% year over year. And about 2/3 of the 1.3 billion low value shipments that come in associated with the de minimis, that's the less than $800 price point, came from China. Large chunk of that we talked about in the past is coming from Shein and Temu specifically. And then those are stats for the overall air cargo market. When you get into the e-commerce specifically, estimated 50 to 60% of China to U.S. air cargo volumes is coming from China, and then estimated 20% of the total air cargo volume is this e-commerce part of it. Specifically, this National Foreign Trade Council says, well, don't look at that 35% tariff as being how much the value is going to increase. Think about it more than doubling when you include all the paperwork, the brokerage fees, et cetera. So it's really, from their perspective, really going to have a huge hit to the e-commerce market. And then Eric's article also gets into potential impacts, such as a potential shift in the strategy for some of these e-commerce players. Already starting to see that with Temu. I think Shein is a little bit less able to do this in terms of having the cargo be fulfilled. There you look at Eric's excellent article that he published late last week. But the e-commerce company is starting to have more fulfillment in the U.S. to just in light of the fact that this de minimis is going to go away right now. Still trying to get those processes in place in order to do that, but it's certainly coming. You brought up the fact that they may have other tariffs on countries outside of China also. Still, at least from my perspective, doesn't impair the desire to have a China plus one strategy to just have that diversification. So it does seem like the market, shifting here. The EU is also proposing away with de minimis. Now their de minimis threshold is a lot lower than what it is in the US. I don't know. It's a lot less than that $800. And then FreightWaves is saying, well, those air cargo spot rates could really drop a lot more than that sonar chart I was showing, which I think was showing $451 a kilogram. FreightWaves is saying, think about that as maybe dropping from, let's call it $5 a kilogram on average to about $3 a kilogram. So FreightWaves seems very bearish. And Zanetta actually has some advice for shippers here. Zanetta recommends that shippers delay negotiations for new contracts until the second quarter, given all this uncertainty. And so it sounds like they're bearish too, from the perspective of shippers. Maybe we'll wait until the market deteriorates before locking in any rates. But anything else you would tell shippers on this, or any reaction to this? Doesn't seem like there's much propping up the air cargo market.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be much either. I think you add the fact that we're just, not frivolously spending on a lot of the things that I think we'd often see come over, especially maybe some of like the Temu Sheins where we buy it and we want it within the next week or so. I think that spending is starting to fall off as well. So you combine everything that you just went over with that, and it makes for this perfect scenario. I would highly back that shipper delay negotiations sentiment as well. It's something that's come up in our meetings that we're hearing from shippers too, not just I think in air cargo space, but in other modes of transportation as well. I think that shippers were smart and read FreightWaves and took advice over the summer leading into Q3, Q4, and planned their inventory really well. Again, a lot of evidence backs that up too from sonar data as well. Of course, we're going to be moving into different seasons here, and will we see pre-planning again? And something we saw last year too, a lot of like pre-shopping for school supplies and things of that nature. Will we see that trend again going into the summertime? How will that affect all of this too? I just think that what we're seeing and following the data is that shippers are being and have been very proactive, which allows them, I think, to take advantage of more of those ocean rates in particular to slow things down a little bit. We've even seen, right, a little bit of the intermodal side here, same thing. How do we slow down our inventory getting into our fulfillment centers, especially on the e-commerce side? And I will say too, I've talked to a number of different, you'll see some articles from me over the next week, a number of different consultants in this space as well. And there's the people that are good at this out there have found ways to, I don't want to say avoid the tariffs, but maybe avoid a little bit of the slowdown and have built relationships to make sure that I think supply chains can keep up with demand without having to see these huge costs starting to incur as well when it comes to some of these tariffs. So I think some of that pre-planning and that, of course, proactive solutions that we've put forth in Q4 of last year is paying off. And I think that's why we see the sentiment that we're seeing today in the air cargo space as well.
So pricing power is starting to favor shippers in the air cargo market. We also think it still favors shippers in the domestic markets. And I wrote up an article for the Go Sonar website, or Gossaner, if that's more helpful. You can find that at on that site. Go up to resources in the middle, and then pricing power index. Doesn't particularly look like a hyperlink, but I assure you that is a hyperlink if you want to click on the pricing power index. And that takes you to weekly report of what's happening in the freight market. Tony Mulvey used to write that up. He's since moved on to another company. So now I'm going to write this up, and decided to keep the pricing power index, the PPI, which should not be confused with the producer price index, at 35. Scale of 0 to 100, lower number favors shippers, higher number favors carriers. So it's still tilted slightly in favor of shippers, and some of the charts to support that. Tender volume index, the volume has been sort of weak in February, maybe surprisingly weak in February, but now it's starting to track. You see that white line is 2025, and in January looked all right. February it's declined, but you see the last couple of weeks it's sort of trending in line with 2023. You did get a little bit of a bounce from middle February towards the end of February, beginning of March. So it doesn't seem to be too much out of seasonality. I think sort of the debate was, well, it was a weak February, throw a wrench into the thesis that freight markets could tighten later in the year. I think our thought is, probably not yet. If you look at the next Sonar chart here, tender rejection index, that's still nicely above where it was the past couple of years. And so with lower volumes year over year, higher tender rejection rate, sort of the implication is that significant amount of capacity has come out of the market. That's ultimately going to be helpful for carriers with the tightening freight market. Also, if you look at the National Truckload Index of line haul rates, the Sonar chart here, these are spot rates with an adjustment to normalize for fuel, because fuel is typically included in a spot rate. We're sort of taking that out. And you see how it's come down kind of basically right in line with what you would expect seasonally, maybe just a little bit more reactive to some of those weather events and above where it was last year. So I thought here is we did experience a lot of normal seasonality in February, which is the weakest seasonal month. I think March will be pretty telling, and March usually the month that makes or breaks carriers' first quarter. Grace, would you agree with all that?
I would. It's happy to see that you're taking Tony's spot, building out that content as well. And for it's interesting for our audience. I would highly suggest visiting GoSonar.com, just because there's a lot of wonderful research on there. And also, with a good minute here left on the show, for all the carriers that might be watching this show right now and think, okay, how can I relate this to the work I'm doing and building my business as well? Well, make sure you also check out the playbook with the wonderful Adam Wingfield. He's partnered with FreightWaves in order to answer those questions, right? How can we take the information from all of the different shows that we have here at FreightWaves and put that into action for all of you small carriers? So make sure you go check out the playbook. I would put my business in the hands of Adam any day of the week. And he's, of course, looking to share some of that advice with you to get you quite literally rolling down that road too. And last but not least, before we wrap this, of course, come to our FreightWaves fraud event, our first fraud symposium in Dallas, Texas on May 14th. We're going to have a wonderful guest there. It's going to be a one-day event, so you're going to leave there with a lot of information and a good action plan and to how to avoid fraud within your business as well, and how to report it and how to actually get a good piece of this fraud actors, right, off of the roads, off of our load boards, etc. So go check that out at live.freightwaves.com, and I hope to see you guys all there. And until then, Mike, watch out for Mike's newsletter for the Stockout later this week. Go join our newsletter at the top of the FreightWaves page and go shopping. So we got some fun stuff to talk about next week as well. Thank you all, and we'll be back on Monday.